Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on our Overflow. And it's so good to be with you all. Today we have Pastor Ryan B, as well as me, Pastor Ryan K. And today Juno is off-site, so he won't be joining us, but he's here in spirit. So thank you so much for joining us. As always, our aim with the Overflow is to dive deeper into the Sunday sermon, to really take a look at what we talked about and how to practically engage with it. And so, just a little recap, we started our series Woven Together. We're really been focusing on community, and we talked about the Greek word allelon and how that means one another or each other mutually, and how that's used 100 times in the New Testament. And one of those cases is talking about bearing one another's burdens. There's actually another reference in Colossians that we didn't get to that's speaking to the same thing. But we talked all about in the sermon how we are called as Christians to be aware of what other people are going through and to carry their burdens together. And this is something that is challenging in an individualistic society, but we as Christians need to work towards. And we even went in a little bit towards the end talking about the current racial tension and racial injustice that's being brought up in the media and in our society and around the world right now. And how can we bear the burdens of the oppressed? That's an important piece. So we're going to talk about this morning and just kind of reflect on some thoughts. And I hope that this time is helpful for you. So with all that being said, our first question is just kind of initial reactions to the message. What stood out? What's been impactful? And what do we need to work through?
Yeah, so I think for me, the biggest thing that stands out about this message is I think the call that we're called to as Christians in this message of bearing one another's burdens runs contrary to the way our culture tends to operate. What I mean by that is I believe there are many great things about American society and many things that are problematic about American society, but we live in a very individualistic culture, even compared to like other cultures around the world, where it's kind of like I got my life, I got my problems, and I'm dealing with them in my space, and it's not anyone else's business, and everyone kind of minds their own business, and that's the mentality. And so I think the call to bear one another's burdens runs contrary to that, and pushes beyond those barriers of individualism and of I have my own problems and I deal with them and it's no one else's business. Because I think that mindset of it's my business and no one else's is not what the Bible calls us to. Because the Bible calls us to live in community, and like we see in the early Christian communities and like Acts 2 and things like that, that they had everything in common and they sold their possessions to give to anyone who had need. So there's this very communal spirit about that. And I think in American culture, we lose that sometimes, which makes this call to share one another's burdens hard. And I think that one thing I liked that Ryan you brought up in your message is like we also tend to sometimes in the church ignore each other's sins, like and you said like yeah, like you have sin and I have sin. We're just not going to talk about it, not worry about it, because grace, 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 and Jesus forgives everything, right? And I don't think that's biblical. Like, in the Bible, if we see another brother or sister in Christ living in sin, we're called to challenge them in a graceful way, but in a way that calls them out of the pattern of sin into the light. So that's just the biggest thing that sets a message is the way that community and being in relationship with one another is such a big part of how we're called to live as Christians. And I think that challenges our American notions of individualism and that, everyone minding their own business and I have my problems and that's my thing. So that's the biggest theme and challenge that stood out to me in the message.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. For sure. I definitely agree. And I think one of the things that I've been reflecting on, even as I've listened to this message back, is just the idea that we are called to, first and foremost, give our burdens to Christ. Like He invites us to bring our burdens to Him, but we also need to share it with others. And I need to accept that it's an area of pride that I want to keep my things private. And that's just kind of the family I grew up in. That's just kind of the culture I grew up in, was you kind of keep problems to yourself and you don't burden everybody else with your issues.
How very American of you.
And it's one of those things where as people would would come to me and just like vomit their problems on me, I would just initially be like disgusted in the sense of saying like, oh, that you're not supposed to do this. Like, this is not how you function. Like, this is bad. But as I've gotten older and as I've studied scripture more and grown as a Christian in maturity, I've seen that there's a biblical call to share our burdens with God and with one another. And there's this tension here where you don't want to be someone that just throws all your problems on somebody else. But you also don't want to be someone who just keeps everything locked in. We have to create room and create space to allow others in. And I think just even in our life group and even amongst our guys and our friends and kind of what we're doing, there's some relationship there that we could have space to say, hey, so and so you shared this last week about what you've been going through, and I've been praying about it and praying for you. And hey, I want to come out and meet up with you or hang out with you or talk with you a little bit more through it or be there for you or show up at your appointment with you or be present in this. And to kind of take a step to do something, I think it is really, really important. But also for me, a challenge area is to share enough about my life openly and honestly with people that there is room for them to come alongside and support me. And just having, twins and having 3 kids, 4 and under, and, being a pastor and being in school and just all that's going on, there have been so many people over the years who have reached out and helped out and come to watch the kids or hang out with them or bring us a meal or come and clean or just come and support. And that's been absolutely huge. We would have not been able to make it through the early childhood years without that help. And so I'm so grateful for how people have come to help to bear my burdens. And I want to make sure I'm doing the same for others. It's easy for me to be prideful in thinking that, I've got real problems, but and I don't really have much time to help other people, but I'm welcoming help from others. And I want to make sure that I'm intentional to create space and capacity in my heart, mind, soul, and time to really reach out to others, check in with what they're doing, and show up for people too.
Yeah. So, and I think another thing is when we talk about bearing each other's burdens is you talked about the fruits of the spirit versus the fruits of the flesh in your message. And I think like the fruits of the spirit loan themselves to caring for one another, to walking through life with one another. When we have love, when we have goodness, we have gentleness, we're caring for one another. Well, the fruits of the flesh are all just, about sinful things that I want to do for myself. So I think a lifestyle of caring about others is how we're called to live as Christians, and that's both being willing, like you talked about, to surrender your own pride and seek help from others, as well as seeking opportunities to help others in community. And I think that's what true community looks like, when we bear one another's burdens and when we are sharing our actual lives, the actual things that are difficult with each other. And we'll kind of get into more practical stuff, but if someone in the church, if you're having problems in your marriage or something, you should be able to go to someone in your church and talk about and walk through that with someone in church, whether a pastor or maybe it's an older member in your life group who you have a close relationship with, or someone same age, doesn't have to be older. But just the idea of someone you have an extended relationship with, you can share those deep problems with, because that's what the church is for, doing real life together, not putting up a facade of everything's okay all the time, because in life we know everything's not okay most of the time. So and that we all have to walk through it together.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I'm trying to think through like how we practically bear one another's burdens and how we can be there for each other. And I was reflecting on some training I went through a while back on listening. And one of the things the trainer said was that oftentimes we listen in a conversation for an opportunity to speak, not for what the person is actually saying and responding to. And so it's easy for me to say, okay, cool. Yeah, actually, I just want to say whatever I want to say.
Right.
And I think that, bearing burdens kind of is in the same vein, in the sense that I can't just hear what people are saying for a pause so that I can say what I want to say, but how can I listen to what people are going through and experiencing and where they might be having some burdens and reaching out to them. One thing quarantine has taught me is to pay a little bit more time and attention to those nurses and doctors and those in the medical field and those first responders who are more on the front lines of all this, and to pay attention to the people in my life who I know who are in those positions, and to take the initiative to try and reach out and pray with them and text them and check in and maybe bring them a meal or get them a gift or help them in some way. And so that's really helped to focus my heart on going out of my way, being proactive and intentional to say, what could this family or this person be going through, and how could I go and help? Way too often we say the phrase, hey, if you need anything, let me know. And let's be honest, how many people who are burned out, tired, exhausted, worn out are letting you know? They're too tired to let you know. They're too tired to ask for help. We just got to take the initiative to just show up. And I think we've probably been helped most by people who just showed up and just did something and didn't wait for us to like reach out and ask. And I'm even thinking about what's going on right now with, the racial uproar of injustice and systemic oppression and all that's been happening. And it's like, if we stand by and sit idle and just say, like, hey, let me know, like, if I can help, we're not going to get much done. But we got to take the initiative to go out and see who is burdened, who is struggling, who is hurt, who's upset, who's angry, and what do they need, and how do they need us to support them, and what can we do to help bear their burdens. And so, yeah, I just think a big piece of this is going out of our way to think through and talk through what people are going through, and then to actually show up for them in any way that we can.
Yeah, and I think that, because that's a true marker of community. And when we talk about these racial issues, we go to a very diverse church overall. We've got a large mix of ages, life stages, races, at our church. And in true community, we are bearing one another's burdens. And as we've seen with these protests that are going on, there is currently a burden on the African American community. And now, speaking as a white man at New Life, if we, as the white people at New Life, that group of people, if we choose to not really care or ignore that the problems that are going on, and we don't really listen to the people of color, the African American people in our community, because it's not our problem, or we think that the protests are bad because of looting, and so we just dismiss it all offhand or anything like that. If that's our response and that's our posture, then we are not as a community, as a church. If that's our posture, then we're not being a community as a church. We say we're a diverse community, but we're really just a bunch of people sharing the same space if we don't listen, if we don't share one another's burdens, if we don't engage with those who are struggling or those who are feeling that burden right now. Because, like we talked about, bearing one another's burdens is what is a marker of community and such a huge part of what community is. So if we are ignoring those who are struggling, or those who are in need right now, or those who are feeling the burden of the issues of racism and things in this country, and we and other groups who are not directly affected by it, or not directly bothered by racism, just ignore it because it's not their problem, or because they think the people looting are ruining the message of the protests, so we don't need to listen to it at all because now it's all bad, or we have that mentality, we are failing in Christian community.
Yeah, for sure. And I think along with that, one of my frustrations is I see a lot of people making the mistake of falling into the habit of looking for any excuse or reason to not support those who are protesting. And they're looking for the character of George Floyd and what kind of person was he really, and the need to support police officers and law enforcement, or people who are looting or rioting, or details in any of the cases that have been decided or not decided. And so many people are distracting themselves with all these other things and aspects, and they're completely ignoring an entire people group, not just in our nation, but around the world, who are crying out for how they've been oppressed and hurt. And if we are Christians, we have the Spirit of God in us, and if we're called to bear burdens of people with them, then we have to approach this by saying, who is the most burdened right now? Who is struggling the most? Who is hurt the most? And to me, at least, it really seems like the Black community has a lot of hurt and a lot of pain. And I don't see how, if any of us claim to have the Spirit of God in us, we could not have compassion or empathy on people who are hurting. Now, there's thoughts and ideas on all sides about how we feel about police or law enforcement or military or politics or all sorts of things. And we want to give room for people to have some different perspectives. But I think the core of this message is saying, if we're seeing somebody struggling, if we're seeing someone burdened, we got to help. I keep thinking about the Good Samaritan parable, and Jesus is saying some pretty righteous people were walking by what appeared to be a very wounded or possibly dead person in the street. And they had every legal justification to totally pass this person by. They had places to be, they had to preserve their purity in order to perform their religious acts as priests. And they had all these great reasons why they should avoid this person who needed help. And it's this Samaritan who in Jewish culture is an enemy, is dirty, is an outcast, who actually provides the help. And that should call all of us out who are looking for excuses not to care about what people are going through or to see their burden or outcry. We need to get rid of those excuses, and we need to come alongside people. And I think that you can empathize and show up with someone who is hurting, and you don't have to agree with every politic that that person has or every perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Taking the care to just, I'm going to show up and I'm going to just be with you. And I keep thinking of, I'm working my way up to get to a protest, and I keep thinking that I don't need to agree with every political statement that gets made. I don't have to agree with every cardboard sign that gets held, but I just want to say, I just want to show up and I just want to be here. And I just want to listen to your stories, and I just want to express that I care, And I think so many people are hiding behind their computers, sharing some post of some obscure person who said something to justify their inaction or their disengagement or their lack of care. And we become the priests who avoid the man wounded in the street and pass by with great justification. I don't want to show up to eternity in heaven and say, sorry, God, I cared more about myself than I do those who were wounded and those who were hurting.
Yeah, that was a lot of good things that I really thought were really powerful that you were just saying. And it's funny you should bring up the parable of the Good Samaritan, because 2 weeks ago, you preached on justice. And, one of the things you talked about was the difference between restorative justice and retributive justice. In America, we normally think about retributive justice, which is punishing a criminal, like the police officers involved with the death of George Floyd. Punishing them would be retributive justice versus restorative justice, which is about taking something that is broken or someone who has been treated with injustice and making it right and fixing the problem. And in the story of the Good Samaritan, if we look at that story through the lens of justice, we see justice served in that story. But you think, wait, but the robbers got away. It never said anything bad happened to the robbers. And yet the justice we see served in the story is restorative justice, when the man who was wounded and beaten and left and robbed and left by the side had his wounds cared for, was taken to a place where he could be medically cared for, and had the medical treatment paid for by the Good Samaritan. That is the justice we see in the story. And often the Bible cares more than when in different passages in Scripture, God cares about all justice, but restorative justice is such a huge focus in the Bible that we don't talk about in American society, because we just think justice, punish criminals. And I think that's a very limited view of justice. And in talking about, and I also like what you said, we don't have to agree with all of the politics of everyone protesting, like obviously we all condemn people who are looting. And some people say it discredits the movement, but I also think that 99% of the people protesting also would condemn those who are looting. 99% of the people walking out there would also say that those who are looting are doing something wrong, and condemn it strongly. So we shouldn't, just as we don't judge all cops off of one or a few incidents, we don't judge this protest off of a few looters, I would say. And I also think, I was looking up a verse while you were talking. As Christians, one of the biggest calls in the Bible is to speak up for those who are poor, who are on the margins of society, those who are oppressed, those the foreigner in your land, when it's talking to Israel, people going through the land. They are called to care for them, provide them food and things like that, and so that everyone is protected and have rights. And in Proverbs 31:8, it says, "Speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable." Well, George Floyd is someone who's been made voiceless, and so was Breonna Taylor, and so was Ahmaud Arbery. And these aren't isolated incidents. So was Michael Brown and Antoine Rose and Alton Sterling and Sam Dubois. And, I don't know all the names on the top of my head, but I know there's hundreds, if not thousands more. And we as Christians, when we see injustice, our response need to be to call for justice, both in retributive justice in cases when it's necessary, but I think way more importantly, B, in restorative justice. And we need to fix things that are broken, and there is something that is broken based on everything that's been happening. And to ignore it is to be like you said, to be the priest or the Levite in the story of the Good Samaritan, and to say, oh, well, I have places to be and I don't want to get my hands dirty, or, oh, this isn't my problem, I didn't rob him. And I think that's another good point to make, is it's not enough. I don't think it's enough to be not racist. You could say like, well, I'm not a racist, so I'm not contributing to the problem. Not being racist, in my opinion, isn't good enough. We have to be actively anti-racist and fighting racism where we see it. Because every time we see racism, that's a form of injustice, and we as Christians are called to fight injustice and speak up for the voiceless. So anyways, I just think it's such a big, complicated issue. We here at New Life, we are not, let me think before I speak for our entire church. This is a nuanced issue. And I don't think it should be a Republican or Democratic issue. If you're a Republican or you lean Democrat or you lean conservative or liberal, we should all be protesting when someone is murdered like George Floyd was. And if you've seen the video and that doesn't make you angry, there's something, then that's a problem, I think, because it should make you angry regardless, and, it doesn't matter, what, even if George Floyd, he was accused of committing forgery, even if he did that, what happened to him was grossly unjust. And that's not how we should be treating anyone in our society, regardless of what they may have done, so anyways.
For sure.
Well, honestly, I could go on about this for much longer than a video like this, so I'll try to restrain myself. But I just think it's such a big issue, and this is such an opportunity for us as a church, specifically for those of us who are not people of color, to bear one another's burdens, to learn from people of color, to listen to their stories, and to fight racism, not just be non-racist, but be anti-racist whenever we see racism, and to protest and affirm the protests happening that against the death of George Floyd and the others. So.
For sure. Yeah, I agreed. We could definitely go on for quite some time on. I think I definitely appreciate the series and taking a look at how we are called as Christians to bear with one another and to be in each other's lives. And I think that's a difficult thing to do if we don't really have very many relationships with other Christians. And so I think even just a key part of being able to do this is being in community with other Christians. It's part of why we promote life groups so much at our church, because when you have a group of people you're regularly engaging with and doing life with, you're way more likely to be able to bear each other's burdens there than, oh, I don't really know many other Christians very well except for my own family or a couple people I rarely talk to. And so part of the call here is to intentionally build relationships with other Christians, and so that we can bear each other's burdens and be there for each other and support each other. So, well, thank you so much for joining us on our Overflow for today. I hope today's been a blessing and encouraging and convicting. May God continue to speak to all of us as Christians around the world, to draw near to him, to become more like his son Jesus, and to engage with seeing his kingdom come and his will being done on earth as it is in heaven. And so thanks again for joining us. Have a blessed day and week, and we'll see you next time.